Julian Assange, una cálida bienvenida al programa.
Muchas gracias, Jorge.
Julian, do you believe that this interview is being heard or spied on by the London police that is surrounding this embassy?
Just a few days ago, it came out that SS-10, a covert operations group, was involved in the policing around the embassy and also the counter-terrorism command. Quite interesting story where there was a police officer outside and a photographer from the Press Association used his zoom lens to zoom up on the piece of paper he was holding and could read all the details about what the police were doing around here. So, yes, we assume that.
The UK was threatening the Ecuadorian government through a memorandum saying that they would be ready to storm into the embassy in order to arrest you. That happened the night before the Ecuadorian government announces that you were having their diplomatic asylum. Tell us a little bit about that night.
Since I came to the embassy 2 months ago, there was a policing presence. We had 2 policemen outside the front door most of the time. However, leading up to that night with the formal threat made by the United Kingdom to Ecuador, saying that they had the right to go in to the embassy and take me, the number of police increased to 50. So it was a really quite dramatic situation. We could hear police running up and down the stairs of the interior fire escape, big police vans being pulled around here. When we put out a notification this was happening, many of our supporters turned up, some 100 people, over 100 people turned up outside the front, and they were live streaming what was happening on their phones and so on, videotaping constantly what was happening.
The press that are criticizing you or criticizing Ecuador, it's, according to what you read, you can read that Julian Assange is using Ecuador for its personal agenda, and Ecuador is using Julian Assange for political purposes for President Correa. Are you using Ecuador, or you feel that Ecuador is using you?
I don't feel that we have been used at all. There's a mutuality in values. There's a mutuality also in the groups that are negatively affecting us and are negatively affecting Ecuador. So this is, and I suppose we can even go beyond that. Let's go straight down to the personal. That I am a person that it has been established is under a political persecution by the United States and its allies. It's a fact. That fact was recognized. I mean, we had to put a lot of work into giving the Ecuadorian government evidence after evidence after evidence about that fact. And they created an assessment, and they're right. They're right. Their political persecution of me and our organization is ongoing. So that's enough. But if we then look into the broader context, Ecuador has been right to demonstrate its values in this case, into not just giving me asylum, but also then publicly. It should give everyone asylum who deserves asylum and where it has the economic capacity to do so. But in going the extra mile to defending my rights in public, because my rights correlate to some of the values that Ecuador would like to project. And I think it does actually believe in that values.
Did you ever thought that Latin America will be behind you so strongly?
I knew we had a lot of Latin American support. I was very pleasantly surprised that it was so uniform. It was everyone in Latin America came to support us. Even those relatively right-wing groups in a couple of countries did not oppose us. So this Latin American solidarity over this issue and supporting me I think that's something important. I don't think that could have happened 10 years ago. I think that reflects a growing strength and integration of Latin America. There's sort of a mutuality, a mutual defense and shared values.
November 28th, 2010, WikiLeaks publishes what is called the Cablegate. Basically, 251,000 cables, mostly about diplomatic cables from diplomatic offices of the U.S. embassies, and also about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And here is what happens the day after in the U.S. Just a recap. The following day, November 29th, 2010, Sarah Palin, former vice presidential candidate in 2008. She said, Assange is an anti-American operative with blood on his hands. Why was he not pursued with the same urgency we pursued Al-Qaeda and the Taliban leaders?
Well, I think Sarah Palin was a bit unhappy. She published her emails before.
It's more than her that is unhappy here. So we have on November 29th, Tony Shaffer, former U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency officer on Fox News. I will look at this very much as a military issue with potentially military action against him as his organization. Again, the 29th and 30th of November. Mike Huckabee, a 2008 presidential candidate in the Republican primaries. Anything less than execution is too kind a penalty. November 30th, Interpol issues a red notice to 188 countries for Julian Assange. November 30th, Tom Flanagan, ex-senior advisor to the Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, he's currently a political science lecturer at the University of Calgary, says, well, I think Assange should be assassinated. Actually, I think Obama should put out a contract and maybe use a drone or something. I would not feel unhappy if Assange disappeared. November 30th, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham referring to WikiLeaks. We are at war. I hope Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney General, who's a good man, will start showing some leadership here and get our laws in line with being at war. November 30th, Representative Peter King, a Republican from New York. Julian Assange is a terrorist. Former Senator Rick Santorum, also another possible presidential candidate for the 2012 presidential election in the U.S., prosecuted as a terrorist. Bill O'Reilly, host of Fox News, I'd like to see a little drone hit Julian Assange. I think he's a bad man. If he lived in Britain, 007 would take care of him. December 5, Mitch McConnell. He is the Senate minority leader in the U.S. Senate. I think this man is a terrorist and needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And if this becomes a problem, you need to change the law. December 5th, Newt Gingrich, another presidential candidate in 2012 Republican primaries. Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism. He should be treated as an enemy combatant, like in Guantanamo or type of prisoner. WikiLeaks should be closed down permanently and decisively. Bob Beckel, from a political commentator of Fox News. A dead man can leak stuff. This guy is a traitor. He's a treasonous. And he has broken every law of the United States. And I'm not for the death penalty, so there's only one way to do it, illegally. Shoot the son of a bitch. December 7th, PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa shut down the donations to WikiLeaks. December 8th, retired Lieutenant Colonel from the U.S., Ralph Peters. Julian Assange should be on a kill or capture list. He's a maggot. He's guilty of sabotage, espionage, crimes against humanity. He should be killed. Finally, the U.S. Vice President, Joe Biden of the U.S., calls Assange a high-tech terrorist. Reuters, talking about what is taking place, say the Obama administration has said Assange's immediate face is in the head of Britain, Sweden, and Ecuador. But Nuland's predecessor, that is P.J. Cowley, said, Assange has painted himself into a corner as he's going to stay there for some time. This is very interesting, and I would like to your opinion. You say, based on emails hacked from a Texas consulting firm, Assange claimed that U.S. authorities issued a secret indictment against him, which could result in him being imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and executed. And Stratforce, that is a global intelligence company founded in Austin, Texas, said that emails leaked by WikiLeaks have discussions surrounding a secret grand jury with a secret indictment. Later, a media organization received the classified diplomatic cables that confirm a secret indictment exists. The documents go to state that Australia has no objection to a potential extradition to the United States. The Australian government confirmed that possibility of extradition but stated that it wasn't unusual as there was an ongoing investigation about WikiLeaks. They point out that the United States may not be intended to Assange. But I want to tell you, before any comment, what your mother said. Your mother said, when Julian initially started WikiLeaks in 2006, he told me that he was doing it to help people in repressive regimes to be able to whistleblow, to get the truth about some of the abuses happening inside the countries. For 4 years, that is what was happening. And his life was not threatened in any way. He was safe with that work. But then, when the document came to WikiLeaks Dropbox on America, things all changed. For some reason, it was all right to produce documents about other countries, but as soon as the United States was embarrassed, his life became threatened. So I have two reactions. One as a mother, of course. I wish he never done it. But as a citizen, having investigated what WikiLeaks has done to bring transparency to the world about abuse of power, corruption, extortion, kidnapping, torture, and fraud involved with big financial institutions, of course, I completely support my son. That's why you're here.
Yeah, that's right. The decision by the Ecuadorian government to grant me asylum under the basis that my fears of persecution by the United States are reasonable. And they spent 2 months looking at all this material, some of the material you just read. That's important also for my organization. It's important for other people who are in similar positions. Being the most prominent person, there is the most movement towards me because it sets the strongest example that if you defy the will of the United States, then something bad happens to you. So they need a prominent person to display that to. But there are other people that are swept up in this grand jury investigation. It's come out that there are at least 7. And those include the founders and managers of WikiLeaks, which is principally me, but perhaps also some of our other people. This enormous list that you gave, it misses some things. Of course, it misses many more additional threats, but there's some recent material. For example, the Department of Justice just 6 weeks ago said to Agence France Presse, yes, we admit that there is an ongoing investigation. The State Department just last week said, no, there's not a persecution, but we won't answer whether there's a prosecution. So there's a large investigation, and I guess it's important to understand the scale of this matter. Australian diplomats to Washington reported back what they were told by US officials. And they say that the investigation against WikiLeaks is unprecedented both in its scale, its size, and its nature.
The US official version. This is Victoria Nuland. She is a State Department spokesperson. She said, well, let me start with the fact that, talking about Julian Assange, he's making all kinds of wild assertions about us, when in fact His issue with the government is with the government of the United Kingdom. It has to do with whether he's going to go stand, face justice in Sweden for something that he has nothing to do with WikiLeaks. It has to do with charges of sexual misconduct, so he's clearly trying to deflect attention away from the real issue, which is whether he's going to face justice in Sweden, which is the immediate issue. So that case has nothing to do with us. It's a matter between the UK, Sweden, and now Ecuador has inserted itself.
Well, the US government also falsely stated that I was charged. You see exactly what happened. Now, you have to be very careful with this and the statements that officials are making. So here, and we've seen the US ambassador to Australia do exactly the same sort of rhetorical trick. It's to say the extradition case between the UK and Sweden for Mr. Assange is nothing to do with us. Now, formally, that's true. In a formal sense, it is nothing to do with them. In terms of it, Sweden has made an application. The UK is responding to the application. What is not being said is that there are other matters that the US is involved in. It's just admitted by the Department of Justice that is ongoing. In fact, in that same statement by the State Department, if you go a bit further down, she does this well. There's I refuse to say whether there's a prosecution. It's not a persecution. I refuse to say whether it's a prosecution. So these are matters that are to do with the United States, but it's a little rhetorical tricks to use in order to manipulate the public and to manipulate the press. And the press should know better. In fact, it really depends on whether the press is favourable to us or favourable to the US or favourable to the UK as to what gets reported. So you see a statement like that, where if you go further down, actually you see there's essential an admission of an ongoing investigation, prosecution. But the first part is the denial, and they'll just take the denial and they will not report the rest because they want an excuse to push a particular agenda.